Mic check 1 2. It's the Y2K collector. And was Generation 6 the best generation of video games? And I think that that's a very valid question. And I think it's something that's being asked right now because we are coming up on that nostalgia moment for Gen 6. I don't think that we've quite hit the nostalgia moment for Gen 7 quite yet. Although people are still very much collecting for, Wii and 360 and PS3, I think Gen 6 is truly the generation that is really capturing the hearts of gamers right now. We saw that with the GameCube craze that had been going on for the past couple of years. There was definitely a rise in like PlayStation 2 games and just PlayStation 2 nostalgia. Same thing for original Xbox. I think there's been a lot of nostalgia there. And then, of course, the Dreamcast. I think that there is a cult following for the Dreamcast. I think the challenge that has occurred with Gen 6, really a really big challenge, and I think it's a little bit different from, say, like Gen 5 and even Gen 4, right? And if you consider Gen 4, like to me, Gen 4 would be like the Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis era. And then Gen 5 would obviously be like PlayStation 1, Nintendo 64. You could throw Sega Saturn in there. That would be that generation. The challenge with, I think, Gen 6, and you could probably say the same thing to a degree with Gen 5, is that I feel like Gen 6 is a little bit more expensive, I guess you could say, for for the higher end games. Um, and I want to say that Gen 6, even though you have classic games like this one right here, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, and even Grand Theft Auto 3, when you start getting into some more of the niche titles within the Gen 6 generation, it starts to get pretty pricey. And I think maybe even more pricey than like a lot of what you saw on the Gen 5. I mean, if you think about games like Rule of Rose, Kunan, Blood Will Tell, you start thinking about some of those games. And then when you think about like just the Dreamcast library as a whole, just Dreamcast games are just expensive in general, right? Like that whole trying to collect for the Dreamcast, you'll go broke just because there's so many expensive games on that console. And then GameCube inflation has just been crazy, right? Like any really good game on the GameCube is going to be expensive, even if it's like a mass-produced game, like I don't know, like a Thousand Year Door or any of the Zelda games, or a lot of the Mario games are pretty expensive. So I think there's like a Gen 6 tax right now when you think about the GameCube, the Dreamcast, PS2, and Xbox, that I think just makes it a little bit difficult for the generation that has that nostalgia to get into it. The generation that has a lot of nostalgia for, say, like Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, and even to a certain degree, like PlayStation 1 and like Sega Saturn and N64, that generation, for the most part, is at a place financially or they should be anyway, at a place financially where they can indulge in a lot of the games from that era. They have the disposable income to really be able to buy those games, because those folks are probably in their late 30s, mid 40s. They're hovering somewhere around there. I think the generation that probably has a ton of nostalgia for like Gen 6 are probably in their mid to late 20s, maybe early 30s. And, if that's where you find yourself right now, the economy for, I think, that generation hasn't been as kind. I don't think that there has been as many opportunities for that generation to really like build wealth or build like disposable income like that. I feel like a lot of like mid 20 year olds and early 30-year olds are really like struggling to figure out how they're going to navigate life. I think they're finding it very hard to even like own a home, or they're probably finding rent very expensive. And to be quite honest, a lot of the mid 20s and like early 30s, that generation is currently still like living with their parents. And I'm just speaking based on statistics, right? Statistically speaking, A lot of that generation still lives at home with their parents. They still got, they're still trying to figure it out. They haven't really established themselves in their career. So I don't think they have the wherewithal to really indulge in Gen 6 like that. So I think that's kind of the challenge in terms of indulging in that generation. But is Gen 6 the best? Um, I really like Gen 6. It holds a special place in my heart when it comes to gaming. Am I gonna say that it's my favorite generation? Probably not. I think my favorite generation of games is definitely gonna be Gen 4. The Super Nintendo. If it's Gen 4, you let me know if that's Gen 4 for you. But Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, like Neo Geo, which I'm not even sure if Neo Geo is Gen 4 or Gen 5. I think it hovers in the middle somewhere. But like that generation is probably always going to be my favorite generation. Gen 5 is not up there for me. It's not one of my favorite generations. I know a lot of people have a lot of nostalgia for the original PlayStation, N64, but I just don't. I don't have a lot of N64 nostalgia. I had one, but I just don't have it like that. Same thing with PS1. And out of all the consoles from that generation, honestly, the Sega Saturn at this stage of my life is probably my favorite console from that generation. Even though I had a GameCube when it first came out, as an adult, I really don't find the GameCube like that fun to play. It's not something that I'm gonna like bust out and start playing a bunch of GameCube games. PlayStation 2, on the other hand, it's weird. Like, even though I didn't really get a PlayStation 2 when it first came out as a kid, as an adult, I really enjoy, I think, the PlayStation 2 and the PlayStation 2 library a lot more than like, GameCube or even Xbox. But beyond all of that, Dreamcast reigns supreme for me. When it comes to Gen 6, Dreamcast will always reign supreme, because in my mind, the Dreamcast marks the end of like the last true era of the arcades. Like, I feel like after like that generation, like the early 2000s was when like arcades like really died out. And unless you're going somewhere that's like, a barcade, if it's like a bar with like an arcade theme to it, you're really just not gonna find a lot of like standalone arcade places. At least not near me. I don't know many places that are just raw arcade spots, just places that are filled with arcades where you can just go and play arcades without there being some kind of extra twist to it, whether it be like alcohol or if it's not tied to like a hotel or a food spot or something like that. It's kind of rare. And I was an arcade kid, so to me, the Dreamcast really was home to a lot of the major arcade games that I was playing at that time. When you think about the Marvel vs. Capcom series, Project Justice, Crazy Taxi, all those games were really in the arcades. And I remember when they first got to the arcade. I remember when they first brought a Crazy Taxi, like the arcade, to my local arcade shop. It was great, just trying to see how much fare you could collect, trying to figure out how to, navigate the levels. It was a ton of fun. So I think Gen 6 has definitely got a special place in my heart. It's not my favorite generation, but it is definitely up there for sure. I would say it's probably top 3 for me up to this point. For me, it's probably going to be Gen 4, then maybe Gen 6, and then I think after that, I mean, you could pick whichever, you could throw whichever one you want after that. If you want to say Gen 5, I'm not going to be mad at that. If you want to say Gen 7, I'll take that too. But to be quite honest with you, like I'll take this current generation, like the Switch generation, and I don't know if that would be Gen 8. I don't know. I guess Generation 8. So yeah, for me, it'd probably be the Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis era, then the PS2, Dreamcast era, and then this current era would be my favorite. And really, the only reason for this current era would be mainly because of the Nintendo Switch and the PlayStation 4. But let me know what you think down in the comments. What is your favorite era? And which era do you find yourself playing the most today? It's the Y2K Collector, just sharing some thoughts. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and I'll catch you in the video over the weekend. Take it easy.